In the summer of 1985, a quiet neighborhood in Denver was shaken by an unthinkable tragedy: the sudden and mysterious disappearance of beloved triplets, Danny, Ethan, and Joey Thompson. For 3 decades, their mother Maggie and Uncle Arthur searched tirelessly, haunted by unanswered questions. Just as hope seemed lost forever, Arthur discovered a chilling clue hidden in a forgotten photograph, a clue that would unravel secrets buried for 30 years. What he ultimately uncovered was beyond anything they could have imagined. It was a sunny July morning in 1985, warm and bright, the kind of day that felt special without even trying. The neighborhood streets of Denver, Colorado hummed with summertime. Joy as children played outside and neighbors waved at one another with cheerful familiarity. Among these joyful voices were the lively laughs and chatter of the famous red-headed triplets, Danny, Ethan, and Joey Thompson, 3 vibrant 11-year-olds whose infectious smiles and boundless energy made them local favorites. Danny, the oldest by mere minutes, had always been the natural leader of the trio, adventurous, fearless, and endlessly curious. Ethan, quiet but incredibly observant, carried a sketchbook wherever he went, drawing everything from cartoon characters to intricate portraits. Joey, the comedian of the group, had a heartwarming talent for making everyone around him laugh, often lightening any tense moment with an innocent joke. Their mother, Maggie Thompson, was a respected elementary school teacher at Cherry Creek Elementary. Soft-spoken and gentle yet fiercely protective of her boys, Maggie had raised them largely on her own after a difficult divorce a few years earlier. Though life hadn't always been easy, Maggie had created a home filled with warmth, love, and resilience. Her younger brother, Arthur McKinley, had been her rock through it all. A devoted uncle to the boys, stepping in whenever Maggie needed help, becoming a beloved father figure who took great pride in his nephews. That particular summer morning was one the boys had eagerly anticipated, a family outing to the bustling Cherry Creek Shopping Center, a favorite spot for shopping, snacks, and endless adventures. They piled excitedly into Arthur's old blue station wagon, filling the air with playful banter and anticipation. Maggie laughed softly from the front seat, feeling gratitude swell in her chest at the simple joys that surrounded her. Upon arriving at Cherry Creek Shopping Center, the family wandered happily through the brightly lit corridors. Music echoed softly from shop speakers as Maggie watched her sons dart in and out of various storefronts, their red curls bouncing as they pointed eagerly at toys and clothes in window displays. As Maggie paused to glance at the latest books in the bookstore window, a familiar voice called her name. She turned around in surprise, a smile spreading across her face at the sight of Thomas Reed, a high school classmate she hadn't seen in years. Thomas approached warmly, greeting Maggie with an affectionate hug and a nostalgic laugh. They began reminiscing instantly, quickly becoming absorbed in conversation as memories from their youth bubbled to the surface. Arthur, meanwhile, had wandered toward the electronics store, intrigued by the latest stereo systems displayed prominently in the window. His attention briefly absorbed, he assumed the boys were still near Maggie. A few minutes passed, feeling like mere seconds in the friendly bustle of the shopping center. Then, suddenly, Maggie's heart jolted with a strange unease. Turning swiftly, she scanned the area for her sons, expecting to see their familiar heads bobbing through the crowd. But there was no sign of Danny's confident stride, Ethan's quiet contemplation, or Joey's playful laughter. Panic surged through her veins, her voice trembling slightly as she called their names, at first softly, then louder, her tone sharpening into fear. "Danny! Ethan! Joey! Where are you?" she called, moving frantically through the corridors, her eyes darting from face to face, each second increasing her desperation. Arthur quickly returned, sensing something wrong immediately from Maggie's frightened expression. He grabbed her shoulder gently, trying to reassure her, but quickly realized the seriousness of the situation when she couldn't answer where the boys had gone. Within minutes, mall security was alerted, and the shopping center's cheerful atmosphere darkened abruptly. Voices echoed through walkie-talkies as security personnel began combing every corridor, checking stores, restrooms, emergency exits. Every imaginable hiding place was searched thoroughly, but the boys remained stubbornly out of sight. As anxiety swelled, mall management made the swift decision to shut down the shopping center temporarily. Police arrived, quickly joining the extensive search effort, interviewing patrons and employees alike, meticulously checking surveillance footage and tracing each step of the boys. The minutes turned to hours, each passing moment feeling heavier, suffocating Maggie and Arthur under the crushing weight of uncertainty. Maggie sat trembling on a bench, clutching a photo of her sons she'd hastily pulled from her purse. Her gentle face, always bright with kindness, was now etched deeply with worry. Arthur paced restlessly, helpless frustration tightening his chest as he saw his sister's heartbreak unfolding before him. Detective Paul Shepard arrived at the scene, his weathered face set in grim determination. Known for his sharp instincts and blunt manner, he took immediate command, rapidly piecing together the timeline and carefully retracing the boys' last known movements. Maggie tearfully recounted every detail, blaming herself repeatedly for the moment of distraction, while Paul listened closely, noting every word carefully. Despite the intense efforts by evening, there was still no sign of the triplets. Exhaustion and despair hung thick in the air as Maggie returned home, heartbroken, her cheerful home now painfully silent and empty. Friends and neighbors rallied around her, offering hollow reassurances, though no comfort could truly ease her grief. Late that night, Arthur remained at Maggie's side. Sitting beside her at the kitchen table, surrounded by untouched cups of tea, he gently grasped her trembling hand, making a vow with determined clarity. "Maggie, listen to me." Arthur spoke softly, his voice shaking slightly, yet strong with purpose. "I promise you right now, no matter how long it takes, no matter how impossible it seems, I will never stop searching. We will find them." His words hung heavily in the silent room, settling into their hearts with a mix of pain and determination. Maggie met her brother's earnest gaze, feeling a flicker of hope in the profound darkness. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve, silently praying that his promise would come true. Outside, the world continued unaware, quiet beneath the stars, while inside that house, two hearts were bound by an unbreakable promise, marking the beginning of a journey neither could yet imagine. They had no idea that the day which had begun so beautifully, filled with laughter and sunshine, would become a haunting mystery, a question without an answer, echoing silently across 3 long decades. Weeks had slowly drifted by since the tragic day Danny, Ethan, and Joey vanished. The cheerful summer streets of Denver were now shadowed by an unsettling silence. Missing posters lined every telephone pole, store window, and school notice board. 3 identical smiling faces, whose absence created an aching void in the hearts of their community. Life in the once lively neighborhood had turned strangely quiet, haunted by the unanswered question, where were the Thompson triplets? Detective Paul Shepard had lost count of the interviews he'd conducted since the boys' disappearance. Each conversation followed the same draining pattern. Questions met with confused shrugs, worried glances, and vague memories that led nowhere. Paul, a seasoned investigator whose sense of humor had turned dry and sarcastic over years of tough cases, was quickly losing patience. The constant media coverage, flashing his weary face across television screens every night, wasn't helping either. Maggie, grieving deeply yet trying to maintain some semblance of hope, found her privacy stripped away entirely. Journalists lingered by her doorstep, hungry for a new angle or dramatic detail. Each headline hurt more than the last, sensationalized stories overshadowing the simple, heartbreaking truth: a mother had lost her sons and wanted desperately to bring them home. Arthur McKinley, meanwhile, couldn't bear sitting idle. Driven by determination and a nagging sense of guilt, he'd begun his own unofficial investigation. Arthur spent countless hours revisiting Cherry Creek Shopping Center, wandering through familiar corridors, speaking again and again to the same store clerks, janitors, and security guards. He walked through the mall each day, tracing the exact path they'd taken that dreadful morning, his heart heavy with hope and dread. One particular afternoon, as Arthur approached the bookstore where Maggie had met Thomas Reed, he encountered Paul leaning tiredly against a wall, scribbling notes in a worn notebook. Arthur offered a small smile. "Haven't you memorized every inch of this place by now, detective?" Paul looked up, eyebrows raised, returning Arthur's weary grin. "I was about to ask you the same question, Arthur. You're practically here more than the employees." They shared a brief moment of quiet humor, a rare relief amid the tense atmosphere that had swallowed their lives. Paul shook his head slowly, sighing deeply. "Honestly, at this point, I'd chase a lead from a fortune cookie if it meant finding these kids." Arthur nodded knowingly, his own frustration evident. "Feels like we're chasing shadows, doesn't it? Everywhere I turn, it's another dead end." The two men, despite their contrasting approaches, Paul's methodical, skeptical logic and Arthur's passionate persistence, found unexpected camaraderie. They began trading observations, theories, and even a few sardonic jokes about their luck, forming an unlikely partnership bound by mutual respect and shared desperation. Days turned into more weeks, with Arthur and Paul working tirelessly, side by side. Leads came and went quickly, each tip evaporating under scrutiny. A witness claimed she'd seen 3 boys matching the triplets' descriptions entering a mysterious van, only to retract her story when confronted with inconsistencies. Another man confidently described how he'd watched the boys leaving through the north entrance, a detail quickly debunked by video footage. Frustration simmered beneath Paul's controlled exterior, and even Arthur's steadfast optimism was starting to fray. During a particularly slow afternoon, Paul and Arthur found themselves sitting in the mall's food court, sharing lukewarm coffee and weary glances. Paul stirred his drink absent-mindedly, breaking the silence with a bitter chuckle. "You know, Arthur, I've cracked bank robberies quicker than this. At least criminals usually leave some clues behind." Arthur rubbed his tired eyes, smiling weakly. "And I've broken scandals wide open as a journalist, but this feels like chasing ghosts." Paul looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded slowly, his voice softening with empathy. "We'll keep chasing until we find something real. These kids deserve that much." Arthur exhaled heavily, staring across the crowded food court. Families ate lunch quietly, laughter muted. Life had gone on for everyone else, but for Arthur and Maggie, time stood painfully still. Back at Maggie's home, the burden of uncertainty weighed heavily on her. Arthur often returned from his searches to find her sitting alone in the kitchen, lost in thought, staring blankly at a half-finished puzzle the boys had been working on before their disappearance. He would sit beside her quietly, gently reminding her that hope was still possible, even if difficult. One evening, as the news played softly on Maggie's television, Arthur sat flipping through his notebook, trying to connect dots that stubbornly refused to align. Paul had called earlier, frustrated, again by a lack of progress. The case was slipping into cold case territory, a fact both men vehemently refused to accept. Suddenly, the news anchor's voice broke through Arthur's thoughts, capturing his attention instantly. "Breaking news tonight. Benjamin Tiller, a Cherry Creek Shopping Center employee and an early person of interest in the disappearance of the Thompson triplets, was found dead today under suspicious circumstances." Arthur sat up sharply, eyes wide with disbelief. Maggie appeared in the doorway, face pale, visibly shaken by the reporter's words. The anchor continued somberly. "Authorities have not disclosed the exact nature of Mr. Tiller's death, but sources indicate foul play is suspected. Investigators have not yet established any direct link to the disappearance of the Thompson boys, but this unexpected development raises troubling questions." Arthur's mind raced. Benjamin Tiller had been one of their earliest leads, someone who had caught Paul's attention due to his suspicious behavior and vague answers during initial questioning. His death was sudden, alarming, and deeply unsettling. Maggie's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, fear evident in her eyes. "Arthur, what does this mean? Could he have been involved, or is someone trying to silence him?" Arthur rose quickly, moving toward Maggie and placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, even as his own confidence faltered beneath the weight of uncertainty. "I don't know yet, Maggie. But one thing's clear. There's more to this than we thought." As the news segment ended, a heavy silence filled the room, thick with unanswered questions. Arthur felt renewed urgency coursing through his veins. Benjamin Tiller's mysterious death wasn't just a new twist. It was a clear warning that someone or something sinister was hiding behind this baffling mystery. Outside, the neighborhood settled into uneasy darkness, each house seemingly touched by a sense of foreboding. Arthur knew he couldn't afford to slow down now. He was no longer just looking for his nephews. He was chasing a hidden truth, shrouded in shadows and silence, determined not to let it escape. Arthur gently squeezed Maggie's shoulder once more, voice firm yet reassuring as he spoke. "We're getting closer, Maggie. Whoever's behind this thinks they're ahead, but they've just given us another clue. We won't stop until we find out exactly what happened." With determination strengthening his resolve, Arthur knew the days ahead would demand even greater perseverance, courage, and patience. But he was ready to face it all, ready to confront whatever darkness lay ahead in pursuit of the truth. Deep down, beneath the surface of uncertainty, he felt an unmistakable certainty emerging. They were about to uncover something far darker and far more dangerous than either of them had ever imagined. Years slowly faded into one another, like quiet whispers lost on the wind. The bustling energy that once filled Maggie's home gradually became subdued, settling into a gentle hush of acceptance, marked by the occasional laughter of neighbors' children, drifting softly through open windows. For Maggie Thompson, life had transformed into a careful dance of silent resilience, her days quietly defined by a lingering ache that never quite left her heart. After the initial frenzy faded, when reporters stopped knocking at her door and the news cameras turned their attention elsewhere, Maggie chose to channel her overwhelming grief into action. She found a purpose in helping others whose loved ones had similarly vanished, becoming a soft-spoken yet fiercely committed advocate for families trapped in the same heartbreaking uncertainty she knew too well. Her home, always open and welcoming, often served as a safe haven for those who understood the quiet agony of loss. She offered not only emotional support, but practical guidance, knowing firsthand how overwhelming each step of the painful journey could be. Her brother, Arthur McKinley, however, had found it impossible to move forward in quite the same way. For him, time had stood painfully still, anchored stubbornly to that summer day in 1985. Though officially retired from journalism, Arthur maintained a small home office overflowing with papers, notes, and countless boxes filled with clippings, maps, and hastily scrawled theories, a testament to his tireless search for the truth. His hair now peppered with silver, his once vigorous stride softened by the weight of years and countless dead ends, Arthur still approached the mystery with unwavering determination, convinced the answers lay just beyond his grasp. Every lead that surfaced, no matter how faint or implausible, Arthur pursued diligently. From vague tips received through letters to late-night phone calls from strangers claiming impossible knowledge, each tiny glimmer of hope spurred him onward. Yet, inevitably, each lead ended in frustration, pushing the painful truth further into shadows he could never quite illuminate. Paul Shepard, the seasoned detective who had become both ally and friend, retired quietly, carrying with him an uneasy feeling of unresolved failure. Though he occasionally visited Arthur to discuss old theories over bitter cups of coffee, it was clear that the unsolved case weighed heavily upon him, etched deeply into his tired features. Paul had seen many mysteries come and go, but none haunted him like the Triplets' disappearance. Arthur and Paul's meetings became infrequent but cherished rituals, reminders of the bond they'd formed through shared struggle. During these quiet conversations, they often reflected on how profoundly the case had changed them. Paul spoke openly of how he'd become more protective of his grandchildren, haunted by fears he could never quite explain to others. Arthur shared his own silent burdens, nights spent awake, replaying events endlessly in his mind, searching desperately for something he might have missed. Meanwhile, Maggie's strength became a quiet beacon for the community. Her serene composure and warm presence belied the sorrow she carried privately. She often found herself at community events or charity gatherings, speaking softly yet powerfully about hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Yet in the solitude of her home, late at night, she still carefully maintained the bedrooms of her sons, frozen in time. Each room remained exactly as the boys had left it, untouched, like small sanctuaries preserving her memories, bittersweet and sacred. Life moved forward around them, gently urging acceptance, but never forgetting the painful absence that defined their days. Arthur watched as friends and acquaintances aged and changed, their own families growing, moving away, or returning after long absences. Yet for him, the clock remained stubbornly fixed, frozen on the image of 3 smiling faces he'd vowed never to forget. Then came the day marking 30 years since the boys had vanished, a somber milestone Arthur approached with dread and determination. As usual, Maggie spent the anniversary quietly, hosting a small memorial gathering at her home, surrounded by close friends and neighbors whose supportive presence filled the rooms with warmth and quiet strength. Late that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Arthur lingered, restless yet determined. Alone in the quiet of Maggie's living room, surrounded by the gentle ticking of the old grandfather clock, he reached for an old family album from a shelf crowded with memories. The album's cover was worn and faded, filled with captured moments of happier times, the boys as toddlers, giggling together beneath autumn leaves, school plays, summer picnics, and quiet family dinners. He turned each page slowly, lingering. Over every image, warmth and sorrow mingling softly in his chest. Then suddenly he paused, his breath hitching sharply in his throat. His eyes narrowed as he stared intensely at a photo he had seen countless times before, a picture taken at Cherry Creek Shopping Center on the very day the boys disappeared. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Maggie smiling gently, Arthur nearby, seemingly lost in thought, and the boys clustered around her, their red curls bright under the artificial lights. But as Arthur's eyes drifted carefully beyond his family, toward the background of the photo, a strange figure emerged, half hidden among the crowd. A figure he'd never noticed before. Arthur's pulse quickened. He grabbed his reading glasses, heart racing, his gaze focused sharply. Standing slightly apart from the bustling shoppers, partially concealed behind a decorative plant, was a man whose eyes were locked directly onto the boys. A chill ran down Arthur's spine as he recognized the familiar but sinister outline of Benjamin Tiller, the employee whose mysterious death had thrown the investigation into deeper confusion decades earlier. What disturbed Arthur even more was Tiller's expression, a dark intensity, unsettling and predatory, entirely unnoticed at the time the picture was taken. How had Arthur missed something so crucial, so glaringly out of place? His mind raced, flooding with urgent questions and troubling suspicions. Could Tiller have been involved more deeply than anyone suspected? And had someone else silenced him to prevent the truth from surfacing? Arthur felt a painful surge of guilt for not having noticed sooner, years of searching suddenly feeling inadequate. In the oppressive silence of Maggie's living room, Arthur rose abruptly, his mind now sharper, clearer, his heart beating fast. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffocating beneath the weight of the revelation he had stumbled upon. The faded photograph clutched tightly in his trembling hands. Arthur knew instinctively he had found the first genuine breakthrough in years. He turned toward Maggie, who stood silently in the doorway, watching him closely, sensing immediately something had shifted. Her eyes searched his face urgently. "What is it, Arthur?" she asked softly, fear and hope woven carefully in her voice. Arthur hesitated only briefly, understanding the weight of his next words. "Maggie," he began, his voice calm yet resolute, filled with cautious determination. "I think I've found something. Something we missed all those years ago." Maggie's face softened with anxious curiosity. "What do you mean?" she whispered, stepping closer. Arthur held the photograph out to her, his finger gently pointing toward the unsettling figure in the background. Maggie's eyes widened as she recognized Tiller, her expression shifting quickly from confusion to shock, then finally to a painful realization. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Benjamin Tiller?" Arthur nodded solemnly. "Exactly. He was there, Maggie, right behind us, watching the boys. We missed it completely." Maggie raised her eyes to meet his, a mixture of fear and hope now clearly evident. "But he's dead, Arthur. How can this help now?" Arthur's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, determination hardening his features. "Because someone wanted him silenced, Maggie. If Tiller knew something, If he saw something important enough to cost him his life, then the answers we've been searching for are still out there, waiting to be uncovered. She took a steadying breath, grasping his hand firmly, drawing strength from his resolve. The quiet hope she had nurtured for decades suddenly ignited anew, raw and powerful. "Then let's find them," she said, her voice quietly determined. "Whatever it takes." Outside, darkness settled over the quiet neighborhood, stars shining softly above homes filled with secrets yet untold. For Arthur and Maggie, however, the night was no longer a barrier, but rather a doorway to renewed hope and quiet determination, a promise that even after 30 long years, truth could still prevail, hidden somewhere in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. The next morning, under a pale, cloudy sky, Arthur stood on Paul Shepard's doorstep, gripping the photograph so tightly his knuckles turned white. Paul, now retired, lived in a modest bungalow on the quiet outskirts of Denver, where the bustling city noises gave way to gentle birdsong and whispering trees. When Paul opened the door, his surprised smile quickly turned serious as he saw the urgency etched into Arthur's face. "Arthur, you look like you've seen a ghost," Paul said, stepping aside to let his friend in. Arthur didn't respond immediately, just stepped inside and handed Paul the photograph. Paul took it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he studied the faded image. Arthur watched his face closely, noticing the exact moment Paul's expression changed from curiosity to shock. "My God, is that Benjamin Tiller?" Paul whispered, eyes fixed on the ominous figure in the background. Arthur nodded solemnly. "He was there the day the boys vanished. We never noticed him before. He was watching them, Paul." Paul sank heavily into a chair, holding the photograph gingerly, as though it might shatter under the weight of its revelation. 30 years, Arthur. How did we miss this?" "I don't know," Arthur replied softly. "But this changes everything. Benjamin's death, it was never just an accident or coincidence. Someone silenced him." Paul's eyes glistened with renewed intensity. Retirement hadn't dulled his investigative instincts. If anything, the unresolved mystery had sharpened them. "So what now? The official case is cold. We're on our own." Arthur leaned forward, voice steady and firm. "Then we do it ourselves. Quietly, carefully. We owe it to Maggie, to the boys, to ourselves." The two men exchanged a determined glance, a silent vow passing between them. They knew the risks, knew how painful reopening old wounds could be, but the truth was a stronger force than their fears. Their first step led them back to the Cherry Creek Shopping Center, now extensively remodeled but still haunted by memories. Quiet conversations with older employees yielded hesitant whispers about Benjamin Tiller, a man who had always seemed friendly, if somewhat distant, yet carried a vague reputation for peculiar habits. Then, an elderly janitor named Frank mentioned something peculiar: an old system of underground tunnels beneath the mall, forgotten relics from Prohibition days. Frank remembered Benjamin spending unusual amounts of time in the lower storage rooms near the forgotten entrances. Intrigued, Arthur and Paul decided to explore the tunnels themselves. Late that night, armed with flashlights in their quiet resolve, the two men descended into the hidden tunnels beneath the city, guided only by faint whispers of the past. The air below ground felt heavy, cold, thick with decades of silence. The tunnel walls were rough stone, damp and covered in patches of moss, echoing faintly with the distant hum of the world above. Every cautious step echoed softly, creating an eerie rhythm that matched the anxious beating of their hearts. Arthur's flashlight beam trembled slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. Paul, despite his outward calm, walked slightly ahead, eyes sharply alert for anything unusual. They moved carefully through winding passages, tunnels branching in multiple directions, some blocked by rubble, others leading into darkness so deep it felt oppressive. Hours passed with little discovery beyond dust and forgotten relics of the past. The tunnels stretched endlessly beneath the bustling city, a hidden world untouched by sunlight or truth. Then, as hope began fading, Paul spotted something half-hidden beneath old debris. Kneeling slowly, he brushed away decades of grime to reveal a small, tattered shoe, a child's sneaker, faded and worn, undeniably from the 1980s. Arthur's breath caught painfully in his throat. Joey had shoes just like that, he whispered, his voice trembling. They exchanged uneasy glances before pressing forward with increased urgency. A short distance away, in a small, forgotten alcove, they found more heartbreaking relics. A small red baseball cap, Ethan's favorite toy robot, and finally, a worn, leather-bound school notebook, Danny's notebook. Arthur's hands shook as he carefully opened the pages, shining his flashlight to illuminate the handwritten notes, once innocent reminders of childhood innocence and learning, now haunting echoes of a life abruptly halted. As Arthur flipped slowly through the pages, a chilling, hastily scribbled note stopped him cold. In shaky handwriting was a single, cryptic message. "He isn't who he seems." Arthur's blood ran cold. He turned slowly toward Paul, whose face had paled visibly. "Danny wrote this," Arthur murmured, voice barely audible. But who is he referring to? Paul swallowed hard, jaw set in determination. "We need to dig deeper. Whatever happened here, Benjamin wasn't alone. Someone else was involved." As they turned to retrace their steps, a sudden noise echoed sharply from deeper within the tunnels, a distant footstep, followed by silence. Arthur's heart raced, every instinct screaming that danger was close. Paul raised a finger to his lips, signaling quiet, and motioned Arthur to dim his flashlight. Standing together in darkness, they strained their ears, hearts pounding in the heavy silence. Then another sound, a soft scrape, unmistakably deliberate. Someone was in the tunnels with them. Paul gripped Arthur's arm firmly, eyes intense, silently communicating their need for caution. Slowly, silently, they moved through the oppressive darkness, guided by the faintest outline of tunnel walls, adrenaline surging with every cautious step. As they reached a junction, another sound echoed closer, footsteps unmistakably human and cautious, mirroring their own movements. Paul's eyes flickered with quiet alarm. Whoever was down here knew these tunnels well, better than either of them. They carefully chose another route, moving faster now, breathing shallowly, nerves strained nearly to breaking. The footsteps behind them grew louder, confident and purposeful. The tunnel seemed to narrow around them, squeezing their hearts in a vice grip of fear. Paul finally grabbed Arthur's shoulder, whispering sharply, "Through here!" They quickly ducked into a hidden passage, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. The footsteps passed their hiding spot without slowing, fading gradually, into distant echoes, leaving only their harsh breathing and pounding hearts behind. After several tense minutes, they carefully emerged from hiding, their relief tempered by lingering anxiety. Whoever it was had been searching deliberately, knowingly, proving beyond doubt the case was far from cold. Someone was still determined to keep old secrets buried. Exhausted yet more determined than ever, Paul and Arthur climbed out of the tunnels, emerging under a cold, starless sky, the night air cleansing their tension briefly. They stood quietly, breathing deeply, each understanding the stakes had risen dramatically. "We're getting close," Arthur murmured, eyes narrowed in thought. "Too close for comfort." Paul nodded grimly. "Whoever was down there knows exactly who we are. They'll be watching us now." Arthur gripped Danny's notebook tighter, resolve hardening in his chest. "Let them watch. They can't hide forever. Not anymore." Paul smiled faintly, respecting Arthur's stubborn courage. "Just promise me you'll be careful. We've both grown too old for heroics." Arthur's lips twitched in brief amusement, despite everything. "No promises. Not until the boys are home." In quiet agreement, they moved cautiously through darkened streets, each step renewing their commitment to uncovering truths hidden beneath layers of silence, secrecy, and time. Yet the mystery of Danny's chilling note haunted them deeply, echoing silently with every heartbeat. "He isn't who he seems." They walked forward, unaware that eyes were already upon them, watching silently from shadows unseen. Eyes belonging to someone determined to keep the truth buried forever, even if it meant revisiting sins from decades past. The days following their discovery in the tunnels felt heavier than any Arthur had known before. He spent sleepless nights poring over Danny's notebook, the haunting phrase echoing endlessly through his thoughts. "He isn't who he seems." The words gnawed at him, each letter twisting deeper into his mind, demanding answers he didn't yet possess. Determined to unravel the cryptic message, Arthur and Paul dove headlong into their investigation once again, this time carefully reviewing every person who had been near Maggie and the boys that tragic day. Their relentless digging soon led them back to the one figure who'd remained at the edge of suspicion but had never truly been considered a threat. Thomas Reed. Thomas had appeared seemingly innocent, a friendly face from Maggie's past. But as Arthur and Paul dug deeper into his background, a troubling pattern emerged. Former neighbors described Thomas as reserved, distant, yet polite enough to avoid suspicion. Still, beneath the surface lay whispers of odd behavior. A man obsessed with past loves, memories he couldn't release, fixations that grew quietly, secretly. Driven by growing unease, Arthur contacted old classmates, seeking insight into Thomas's teenage years. One former classmate, an elderly woman named Helen, provided chilling insight during a quiet conversation over tea. Helen revealed a deeply unsettling secret. Thomas had been profoundly obsessed with Maggie since high school, his affection going far beyond innocent teenage crushes. He'd written her countless letters, many of which Maggie herself had never received, intercepted by her parents who'd found their content disturbing and obsessive. Helen quietly handed Arthur a dusty cardboard box she had kept stored away, explaining softly that Thomas had once entrusted her with it long ago, claiming they were merely harmless memories. Now, years later, Helen understood how deeply troubling the contents were, finally realizing why she'd always felt uneasy around Thomas. Back home, Arthur and Paul meticulously combed through the box, their unease deepening with every page they turned. Letters filled with disturbing declarations of love, obsessive fantasies, and veiled threats written by Thomas painted a chilling portrait of a man lost in obsession. Thomas's love was twisted, possessive, and as the letters became increasingly unstable, Arthur realized the true danger Thomas posed. "Paul, look at this one," Arthur said quietly, holding up a letter. His voice shook slightly as he read aloud. "If I can't have you, Maggie, no one ever will. I'll find a way to stay close to you forever. You and your precious boys will never be beyond my reach." Paul exhaled deeply, running a weary hand through his hair. "We missed it. All these years we completely missed him." Driven by urgency, Arthur and Paul quickly discovered Thomas had vanished from Denver shortly after the boys' disappearance, leaving behind only vague references to a family cabin deep in the Colorado mountains. A remote hideaway, isolated and forgotten, a perfect place for someone to vanish completely. With resolve burning in their chests, Arthur and Paul wasted no time heading toward the cabin. The drive through winding mountain roads felt unbearably tense, the silence punctuated only by occasional attempts at reassurance. Both men knew they were moving toward something dangerous, yet there was no turning back. Halfway up the mountain, Paul's breathing became labored. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and Arthur glanced over in growing concern. "Paul, are you all right?" Arthur asked, worry tightening his voice. Paul tried to wave off Arthur's concerns, but soon his condition worsened. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, his complexion paling rapidly. Arthur ordered him to pull over, quickly realizing Paul was suffering a medical emergency. At the roadside, Arthur helped Paul sit down, the detective clutching his chest painfully. "Arthur, keep going," Paul whispered, determination etched into his strained features. "You have to finish this. Don't let this stop you. I'll be all right." Arthur shook his head vehemently. "I'm not leaving you alone like this." Paul managed a weak, stubborn smile, squeezing Arthur's arm firmly. "I'm stubborn enough to wait for help. Call an ambulance, Arthur, but don't stop. Not now." Reluctantly, Arthur called for emergency help, remaining by Paul's side until he heard sirens approaching. Paul looked up, eyes sharp despite the pain. "Find him, Arthur. Find the truth." Arthur nodded solemnly, knowing Paul was right. The answers lay ahead, hidden deep within those mountains, inside a past long buried yet waiting to resurface. Driving alone now, Arthur's mind raced. Paul's illness had rattled him, yet his friend's unwavering courage spurred him forward. Darkness soon fell, cloaking the mountains in eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath his tires. The cabin appeared suddenly ahead, a dilapidated wooden structure, standing silently amidst tall, shadowy pines. It felt like stepping into a forgotten memory, haunted by past ghosts. Arthur approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, each careful, step magnifying the oppressive silence around him. The cabin door swung open slowly beneath his touch, revealing a dusty, dim interior. Furniture lay untouched, coated with decades of neglect. Photographs of Maggie from her high school years, faded yet recognizable, littered tables and shelves, confirming the depth of Thomas's obsession. Yet as Arthur moved through the unsettling space, something felt incomplete, an absence of presence, as though the cabin was merely a facade, concealing deeper secrets. His eyes caught sight of a worn rug, oddly out of place. Kneeling down, he lifted it carefully, revealing a trapdoor beneath. Concealed yet begging discovery, Arthur's heart hammered fiercely as he pulled open the hidden entrance, revealing a narrow ladder descending into absolute darkness. His flashlight beam pierced downward, illuminating only the faint outline of cold stone below. Drawing in a steadying breath, Arthur began climbing downward carefully, feeling the temperature drop with every rung he descended. The air grew stale, heavy with decades of neglect, until his feet finally touched the stone floor. He swept the flashlight around slowly, revealing a cramped subterranean space lined with rough stone walls. Wooden shelves lined one side, filled with old supplies, books, and personal items. It felt like a hidden refuge, a twisted sanctuary. Then suddenly Arthur froze. A faint, muffled sound drifted toward him. A whisper, soft movement, unmistakably human. He held his breath, pulse quickening, straining his ears carefully. Again the noise, a faint rustling, soft breathing from behind a partially concealed wooden panel on the far wall. Stepping forward slowly, Arthur approached cautiously, heart thundering louder with every step. His fingers gripped the panel, hesitating, briefly before carefully pulling it aside, revealing a narrow passageway descending further underground. From within, the muffled sounds grew clearer, more distinct, signaling he was no longer alone. Arthur paused, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip, realizing fully the magnitude of what lay ahead. Someone, or something, waited for him below, hidden away from the world for decades. His heart raced painfully, fear and hope colliding fiercely within him. Drawing in one last deep breath, Arthur stepped forward into the hidden passageway, determined to face whatever truths awaited him. Behind him, the panel slowly swung closed, sealing him momentarily in absolute darkness. Alone yet determined to confront secrets buried far too long. Praying silently, he wasn't too late. Arthur's pulse thundered in his ears as he moved cautiously down the hidden passageway. The air was heavy, damp, and suffocating. Carrying the weight of decades of secrecy, he felt as if every step he took deeper into the darkness was another step into a long hidden past, one that had shaped his family's destiny in ways too painful to fully grasp. The sounds grew louder as he approached, voices clearer, though muffled, speaking quietly, urgently. Arthur steadied his trembling breath, moving carefully until the narrow corridor opened into a larger chamber. His eyes widened, heart stopping momentarily at the astonishing sight before him. Standing in the dim, artificial light of the underground refuge were three men, tall, lean, their hair an unmistakable fiery shade of red. His nephews. The faces were older, matured by years of isolation, but their eyes, deep blue just like Maggie's, were unmistakably familiar. Arthur's voice trembled as he whispered into the silence, "Danny? Ethan? Joey?" The three men turned sharply, eyes wide with alarm, suspicion shadowing their expressions. They regarded Arthur as though he were a ghost, a threat from the outside world they'd been taught to fear. Danny, the tallest, stepped protectively in front of his brothers. "Who are you? How do you know our names?" His voice was rough, cautious, tinted with years of distrust. Arthur raised his hands gently, showing he meant no harm. "I'm Arthur, your uncle, your mother's brother. We've been searching for you for 30 years. Ethan's eyes narrowed skeptically. No, we were abandoned, forgotten. He told us. Arthur's voice hardened with conviction. He lied. You were taken from us. Your mother has never stopped hoping, never stopped searching. You were always loved, never abandoned. Their cautious eyes wavered, confusion and tentative hope battling within them. Joey, always the most emotional, stepped closer, a hint of longing softening his face. Mom, is she really still looking? She never stopped, Arthur replied firmly. She keeps your rooms exactly as you left them, your toys, your books. She has never given up hope. A wave of raw emotion rippled through the brothers, their carefully built walls crumbling slightly. Arthur could see years of deception unraveling before his eyes, replaced slowly by hesitant trust. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind Arthur, sharp and frantic. He spun around quickly, facing the figure emerging from the shadows. Thomas Reed stood in the doorway, his face twisted in fury, desperation blazing in his eyes. You shouldn't be here, Thomas hissed, advancing aggressively. I protected them. I kept them safe. Arthur stepped firmly between Thomas and his nephews, standing tall despite his pounding heart. You stole their lives, Thomas. You stole Maggie's heart and left her broken. Thomas laughed bitterly, eyes wild with misplaced rage. She belonged to me. She rejected me, but I never gave up. Keeping her sons meant she could never forget me. Danny stepped forward angrily, betrayal shining in his eyes. You lied to us. All these years you said no one wanted us, that you saved us. Thomas's voice cracked under the weight of his collapsing reality. I did what I had to. Maggie wouldn't love me, but this way, she'd never forget me. Thomas lunged suddenly, desperation fueling his reckless move. Arthur grappled fiercely, their struggle intense and chaotic. Just as Thomas began overpowering Arthur, a figure burst through the darkness, tackling Thomas to the ground. Paul Shepard, tired, pale, but fiercely determined, had arrived just in time. Despite his weakened condition, Paul's resolve burned, brighter than ever as he subdued Thomas, restraining him firmly. Arthur staggered slightly, catching his breath as he looked gratefully at Paul. You made it. Paul managed a weary smile, still pinning Thomas firmly. Couldn't let you finish this alone. The brothers watched, stunned, confusion and hope swirling through their expressions, as Paul and Arthur led Thomas away, finally ending their decades-long nightmare. Hours later, dawn broke gently over Denver, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and pink. Maggie stood anxiously on her porch, heart pounding violently, eyes brimming with desperate hope. A car pulled slowly into her driveway, doors opening quietly. Arthur emerged first, followed by Paul, but Maggie's eyes fixed immediately on the figures stepping hesitantly behind them. Danny, Ethan, and Joey stood quietly, their faces older, but achingly familiar. For a moment, Maggie couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, with a choked cry, she ran forward, arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. The boys stepped toward her slowly at first, then faster, meeting her halfway in a fierce, tearful embrace. Time melted away as decades of grief and longing found relief in shared tears and whispered reassurances of love. Arthur watched quietly, eyes glistening, overwhelmed by the raw power of the reunion. Beside him, Paul cleared his throat softly, also deeply moved. This is why we kept searching, Arthur, for moments like these. Arthur nodded silently, his heart full, finally understanding fully the value of perseverance, the unbreakable strength of family, and the relentless power of hope. Days passed, marked by countless heartfelt conversations, shared meals, and rediscovering connections long thought lost. The boys learned slowly to navigate a world that had changed dramatically, guided gently by Maggie and Arthur's unwavering patience. Each small moment became precious, each laugh and quiet conversation a treasure, reclaimed from darkness. One peaceful evening, as Arthur sat quietly on the porch, Danny approached hesitantly, eyes thoughtful. He sat beside Arthur, gazing silently at the fading sunlight. Uncle Arthur, Danny began softly. All those years, Thomas told us we were forgotten, that no one ever tried to find us. Arthur placed a comforting hand on Danny's shoulder, speaking gently. He wanted you isolated, controlled. But the truth is, you were always remembered, always loved. Danny nodded slowly, absorbing Arthur's words deeply. All that time wasted, we missed so much. Arthur sighed softly, gazing at the quiet street. Life has its own mysterious timing, Danny. Sometimes we lose years we can't get back, but we can choose what we do with the ones ahead. Danny turned, eyes earnest, searching for reassurance. Do you think we can truly move past this? Arthur smiled warmly, heart swelling with quiet pride. The past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. You're home now, surrounded by people who love you. Your future is yours again. Danny smiled softly, the weight finally easing from his shoulders. They sat quietly together, comforted by the peaceful night, knowing they faced a long road ahead, but one filled with hope, healing, and family. Late that night, alone in his room, Arthur opened his notebook, pen hovering above the blank page. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully, reflecting deeply on their journey. In the end, our greatest strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the courage to endure, to keep believing even when the world around us darkens. For 30 long years, we lived in uncertainty, our hearts suspended in hope and despair. Yet through it all, the quiet flame of hope never faded. Not entirely. Because hope, no matter how fragile, keeps us anchored to one another, reminding us that every story, no matter how tragic, holds the promise of renewal. Arthur closed his notebook gently, feeling peace settle warmly within him. Outside, stars glittered softly above, their quiet brilliance mirroring the gentle strength he'd discovered within himself and his family. In the quiet darkness, Arthur felt an overwhelming gratitude, not only for the answers they'd finally found, but for the powerful reminder that love and persistence could overcome even the deepest darkness. And as Arthur finally drifted toward peaceful sleep, one simple, powerful truth resonated clearly within him. Even through the longest night, hope never truly dies. It waits quietly, patiently, guiding us gently toward the dawn.